and we wouldn't need to. I personally, I don't think we get a lot of lift by them bringing them in and saying, well, we know that you could practice pharmacy in Virginia today and tomorrow, but maybe you need to do something more down here. Again, somebody's not been licensed at all, I think that's different. And we get a few of those. In fact, Bill, the ones you were talking about, the ones that we would get that came before us, a lot of the pharmaceutical industry folks, those have come in many waves. I mean, many M-I-N-I, not M-A-N-Y, many waves over the years where you had pharmaceutical companies that were shutting down their research departments, and you had pharmaceutical scientists who had not been licensed at all anywhere for some long period of time. That's totally different. Absolutely. They need to come before y'all and figure out what they need to do.
I just want to say back to South Carolina. I think, for one, that this is my personal opinion, they're an umbrella board, and I don't think that they have the luxury of all the staff in the Board of Pharmacy that we do. So I think by default, a lot of these duties fall to board members.
There is a lot of truth to that in other boards around the country.
So personally, I'm just going to say that I feel like that we should give the board authority if that person that reciprocates has been in another state and has kept up all their stuff, saying that they have no disciplinary action, that doesn't need to be brought before the board. Because personally, I don't feel like we should be comparing out-of-state pharmacists to in-state pharmacists, and we should give any other, we shouldn't scrutinize them any more than we do North Carolina's. But that's the way I feel, but I don't know how the rest of you feel about that.
Actually, I feel like the board already has that responsibility, and that is exactly, well, not exactly, but I think they're doing that now. It just so happens that they have information on out-of-state pharmacists who are trying to reciprocate that they don't have on in-state pharmacists. That's the way I see it. So maybe I'm wrong.
So basically, to clarify, we're talking about, giving the staff the authority to just make that decision without.
Well, yeah, what I would say, Keith, is if I were, and look, we don't have to make the final decision today. If y'all give me an idea of what you want me to take a shot at drafting, I'll draft it and then bring it back for you to take a look at. I'm not going to put any modified policy into place unless y'all have reviewed and approved the final product. But what I would be interested in doing, if y'all were comfortable with it, is just taking that out of practice policy that we have and just making a clarifying change that says if a pharmacist seeking licensure in North Carolina without examination, that's the language of the rule, has been continuously licensed, and I don't want to try to wordsmith, but essentially say that if they have been continuously licensed to practice pharmacy, when the out of practice rule doesn't apply to them. Essentially, it only applies to someone who has been without a license to practice pharmacy for the different time periods.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if I made it worse or better, Keith.
No. I mean, bottom line is if they're fit to practice in another state, why make it more onerous for them to come to North Carolina and practice?
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the gist. And Ash, if I heard, if was that what you were trying to say?
Yes, but Jay said it much more perfectly than I did. So
I don't think I did. You're nice to say that, Ashley. I don't.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I'm saying. I just don't think we need to scrutinize them anymore.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
And is Jay is that what you're asking? Because right now that's gray.
Yeah, it is. Oh, it's absolutely gray now as to how that works with somebody who's been continuously licensed. That if that were a policy that an amendment that you all were comfortable with, it would it would bring a lot of clarity to applicants and to staff as we're reviewing any applications coming through.
Jay, why don't you put it in writing what you
Yeah.
do now and what you're proposing or what we've
Sure.
opined on?
Yeah.
What if they
if
want to
y'all
come
are
to
at a
North
point,
Carolina and open up a teeth whitening joint in the mall?
well, we'll leave that to the dental board and have nothing to do with any of that. But yeah, if y'all are comfortable, that's what I'll do is I will work on and it'll be a very slight edit to the existing policy, and I'll bring that back to the meeting next month for y'all to review. And if you're comfortable with it, you are. If not, we'll keep working away at it.
Sounds good.
Not seeing any objection. That sound good to everybody? Good. All right. By golly, that's what I will do. Michelle, I just repinned you. I had lost you on my pen there.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I keep getting kicked off of this, and I'm working with Antoine on the side trying to figure it out. Because
Do you want us to take a break?
No. Go right ahead.
Okay.
Everybody keep going, but I'm trying to work with Antoine on the side. So sorry
Okay.
about that.
No problem. Just let me know if you'd rather take a break. We can do it. All right. Well, in the same vein, I'm getting an echo again somewhere. In the same vein, we've had a couple of, y'all all remember, we've had a couple of requests recently about approval of pharmacist to technician ratios. And y'all had indicated after those, and I will tell you, I thought you worked through them very, very well in the meetings, and y'all had indicated you'd like to take an opportunity here during the retreat to talk about the tech ratio issue. And are there, philosophically things we want to talk about to shape the decision-making process on that, or changes in the policy? And just quick review, under the law in North Carolina, a 2 technician to pharmacist ratios is allowed by statute. There can be more than 2-to-1 ratio if 2 things are true. Number one, each additional pharmacy technician is certified, not just registered. And 2, the board has approved a ratio above 2-to-1. And the current policy is, as given to staff, is if an applicant requests a technician to pharmacist ratio of 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, and on the application it clearly indicates they have sufficient certified technicians to cover that ratio, staff are authorized to approve that request without further involvement from the board. If the request is for a ratio of 5-to-1 or higher, the instruction is to bring that before the board. And I prepared for y'all. This y'all had gotten this before. This was a summary of those requests to the board. It leaves off the 2 most recent ones that y'all approved. And then I attached the survey of pharmacy law that shows how other states handle these. And so I wanted, after that discussion we had and those requests, just wanted to throw it open to y'all to discuss. Do we need to make some changes philosophically, policy, any of the above?
Jay, can you do me a favor? And I know, this goes back longer than your time on the board, but just pretend we're all ignorant at the moment to this issue, and articulate to us how North Carolina came to the conclusion of what we're doing from a tech ratio perspective. When you look at the list, you've got states all over the board. You got a lot of states that don't have any restriction whatsoever. How did we get where we are today? If you can come up with something that would, a foundation behind it, other than just, this is what we decided years ago and this is what we still have, and we've made
it's really a statutory thing, Andy, is where it all comes down. And so the statute says that a 2-to-1 ratio is always permissible. So clearly there had been a legislative judgment made that that one pharmacist supervising 2 technicians of any sort, registered or certified, that was deemed by the legislature to not create any significant risk to the public health and safety, or that the benefits of having that certainly outweighed any risk that came along with that. But the statute itself, as y'all know, does not cap a pharmacist ratio at any particular level. All it says is that as you go above 2-to-1, each additional technician must be certified. So a judgment, Andy, was made by the legislature that additional level of training and proof of competence provided some reassurance that if you're supervising more people and your attention is divided as it would be with that additional training provides the public health and safety support, I guess, or protection. So the statute itself doesn't cap that, but what the statute says is it's up to the board to make a determination as to what an appropriate ratio would be in any particular practice context. So what the statute really has done, Andy, is throw it to you all as experts in the field, as you are, to make judgments about what safe ratios are, and you're certainly you're empowered to do that either by setting categorical or very practice specific. And so some years ago, I'm getting a terrible echo. Or is anybody else hearing that same echo, or is it just me? So what the 3-to-1 to 4-to-1 ratio, Andy, I'm trying to remember, that goes back probably 10 years at least now. Wallace, I think we did it when you were on the board the first time that we set that policy. And I think the board had just made sort of a general judgment that a pharmacist supervising 4 technicians in most any practice setting, as long as those technicians are certified, that's sufficient protection of the public. 5-to-1, the judgment was made. We'd like to investigate that or sort of vet that with a little more specificity about what's going on in the particular practice site. So I think, Andy, that's probably, Wallace is indicating that's what he remembers too, that's how we landed where we've landed on that.
Thank you for doing that, Jay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Actually, I think Clint wants to jump in and tell me where I screwed up on this.
No, I just wanted to give a little more history that I just learned when I got on Westlaw. The statutory language goes back to 2002. So while old, this is not something that was decided, in the 50s when people were using mortars and pestles on the regular. This is a relatively recent legislative judgment.
So that's how we got here, Andy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm, sure. Again, I do want to say that I think the board has been, and I think these examples bear it out, that the board has been really pretty consistent in how it approaches these requests. Whether you think, well, we've been consistent, but we should have a different tack altogether, that's part of what you can discuss. But I do think that you've applied this pretty consistently, even as you considered 5-to-1 or above on a sort of an individual request, as the board has gone through and drilled into the specifics of the practice. I think you've landed on very consistent results about when you allow it and when you don't. But I know that when we had the last one, there was a lot of discussion sort of about, how probing do you think the board should be when a pharmacist manager comes forward and says, I've got a registered tech and I've got 4 certified techs, and I want to be able to use all 5 of my techs all the time. That sort of, how probing do y'all want to be about that? And are there things staff could do better in terms of bringing you information, or other things you think you might need to make those decisions? You're muted, Bill.
Yeah. So the more background information we can have to review prior to the meeting in their request, I think the better decision that we can make, or at least the more comfort we can have with making our decision. And I think the same thing about the reluctance to, get into the weeds in a full board meeting applies here as it does with basically grilling a reciprocity candidate. And maybe we shouldn't feel that way. Maybe we should feel perfectly that it's not just our job, but our duty to probe. But in their request for the change, maybe you could encourage them to really go into detail about, what the normal questions are about, why, what's the circumstances, what are they going to be doing, how are you going to supervise them, give us specifics.
Did y'all feel like the last 2 we had, the 2 most recent ones, and did y'all feel like you got enough information from those folks when they came forward?
Yes.
Absolutely. I think honestly, Jay, the ones that I've been a part of since I've been a board member, they've helped. They've really made our decision for us as they have presented their information.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know we would all usually would go into closed session briefly to discuss it, at least on most of the ones that have been presented to us, but they tell their own story, and really they they either justify it or justify our decision to not grant it. Just by providing us the information and us having the ability to be able to ask the questions that we need to ask.
I would agree with Keith on that.
At least one of the 2 had photographs.
Mm-hmm.
Even a crude video would be better than no video.
Well,
yeah,
and it really does vary on practice setting. I mean, because I think the ones that we've approved have been in a long-term care setting where there's not as much interruption, to the pharmacist by whether it be custom, there's not really interruptions, it's part of our job, but there's not so many things, distractions, I guess is a better word, going on around you. In a long-term care setting, it's a little bit more controlled environment.
So I think my biggest concern with this is I just want to be careful to make sure that, if you have a pharmacy manager presenting this, that you're looking at the bigger picture. Some of those pharmacy managers are coming because their employer or the owner of the company that they work for have asked them to come to do that. So I think the way that we've been doing it, I think works perfectly, because they make a presentation and we're able to get a bigger picture of what they're doing and what they're asking for. So we can safely say that it's okay to have more technicians to pharmacist ratio. So personally, I think the ones that I've been involved with gave us a great overview of that. And I felt a whole lot better about doing that because we had that information.
And I will say that John, oh God, I'm blanking on his last name, John Watson at McNeil's Long-Term Care. You remember when he came forward, I think you were on the board at that point, Ashley, but when he came, he really gave what I thought was what y'all needed to make a a decision that he hit these things. He had that. Here's exactly what we do. Here's exactly my personnel. Here's how our work flows. Here's how we're laid out and described all these things. And one of the reasons most recently you've seen presentations that look like that is I think, that's gotten around, and folks know if you're going to make a request like that, here's the kind of information the board has found exceptionally helpful to that. And that in turn has helped me when somebody calls and says, well, I want to come before the board for a 5-to-1 ratio. I'm able to say, and would be even able to better say after today's discussion, these are the kinds of things that the board is going to focus on, and you need to explain and suggest how to do that.
I'd like to know from Michelle, who brings a really fresh perspective to all this, what kind of things are you or would make you more comfortable? Because I remember one of the last 2 discussions we had, you had some discomfort with the
Right. And I did consider all of that and your position at that point in time was to be able to allow people to, the pharmacists to be able to structure this so that they could meet the needs of their business. And I agree with that 100%. My concern comes in with the public safety piece and what happens with, we have diversions come through where pharmacist managers didn't see it all the time. So adding more people to that puzzle, is that going to make it more difficult for a pharmacist in charge? So I do like the concept of them coming in, showing exactly how they will be able to manage that, because if it's going to have to be on a case-by-case basis, because I don't think you can blanketly say, yep, a 5-to-1 ratio over at this pharmacy is going to be the same as a 5-to-1 ratio over here. So because pharmacies are so specialized in what they do, I do think that they do need to come forward. They do need to be able to address all of the board's concerns in order to be able to move forward.
That's something we could have them explain as a matter of routine. How do they plan to maintain the security of their controlled substances with one more staff member to have to watch after?
And just to, and I got the whole thing from the registered pharmacist to the certified pharmacist, but I think that's going to be very, very important, because at least my understanding was, the way my father did it was, if you were going to be in that pharmacy, even if you were a cashier, you had to register. And I don't know if that was the rule or if that was his thing, but even if they're registered, you still have to, if they're in that pharmacy, you still have to watch them, and things still can go on. So I think whatever we implement needs to be one of those things that gives us the greatest opportunity to understand exactly what's going to go in their operations. I too would, Bill, since you've asked from a comfort level perspective, I too would like to see maybe a checks and balance come in after we go ahead and allow the people to go beyond what has been established. Maybe that there is something where we circle back around in a certain amount of time, in a specified time frame, to monitor, to make sure that it is going as well as they say it is. I don't know. But you asked what would make me comfortable, and I think that checks and balances does add a level of comfort for me.
And one thing that just kind of came to mind too, as we're discussing this, with the us getting ready to ramp up COVID vaccines. Ashley and I have discussed at length how putting the needle in the arm is the easiest part of this whole process. The administrative part is the most difficult one. So you're going to probably see a lot of pharmacies having to exceed these ratios, but it's out of necessity, and it doesn't affect the the safety. It actually probably provides more safety to the citizens of North Carolina, because we're not having we're having people who are directly or focused on doing that one task, but they're still, by the letter of the law, doing a technician task. I mean, am I off base there?
No, that's a good point, I think.
No, and Keith, where it really goes back to is that what you all are telling me that you have found helpful in request is folks who are asking for 5-to-1 or greater. You want some granularity in the request about what exactly is the workflow and what are the tasks you're going to have the techs doing, because you're right, Keith. I mean, even post-COVID, and I know we're going to talk about technician vaccination later today, but if you are a pharmacy that is going to be, even post-COVID, very active, even more actively than a busy pharmacy these days is in administering vaccines, you're right. There might be a difference between, we want a 5-to-1 ratio because essentially we're going to have a dedicated vaccinating tech versus, well, no, I'm just going to put 6 people back behind the counter and let them do whatever needs to be done. And so I think that's a great insight, Keith. And what I was going to say to y'all is that maybe something that would be helpful is I could write up after this something for y'all to take a look at that would not be an application as such for a 5-to-1 or above ratio. But if I could write something up that I could give a pharmacy that would say, so you want to have a more than a 5-to-1 ratio. You're going to come before the board, and here's the kind of information that the board wants to hear and receive from you to help them make the application. And I think if I could do that and circulate it, and then y'all give your good feedback about, well, add this or delete that or change that, whatever. If we came up with something like that Missy and I would have to distribute to folks who are asking, I think that would lead to more consistency in how folks are approaching you and giving you the baseline information that you need to make these individualized determinations.
Well, I'll just unfilter and say we really just need to, but what it comes down to, we need to know, be able to discern the legitimate needs versus pharmacies just trying to skirt, add another pharmacist.
Right.
I mean, what that's what it boils down to.
Right. And I think y'all have done a really remarkably good job on that. That I think in the cases where you've not approved a 5-to-1 ratio, it's because you have looked at a very busy pharmacy that you've articulated public health and safety needs to have more pharmacist staff there. And you're right, Keith, that as they tell the story, it's just like, well, we'd just like to have more tech. So I do think you guys do a good job.
What I don't want to hear is a pharmacist having more tech so they have more prescriptions to check and can do even less patient counseling. I think we do a terrible job with patient counseling in some settings now, and I don't want to see that get worse. But if more techs allows more patient time, great. But the practice settings are going to be widely varied.
Would y'all like me to do that then, is to sort of take this discussion and try to come up with something for y'all to look at? That, again, I don't think we want to make it a rigid template of any sort, but sort of a guidance document that says, if you're going to come before the board and ask for these, here are the things that you need to make sure you're prepared to address.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
That'd be great, Jay.
All right.
Does Clint need to say something, or is his hand still raised from before? Okay.
I'm just a teacher's pet. I always keep my hand up.
I remember people
it's got a little cigarette lighter in it. He's just kind of come by yon.
Oh,
Can we
God.
take a quick break before Cindy and Joe get started?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that, Ashley, if it's okay with you. It's right at 2:00. I know Cindy and Joe are on. Maybe we could take, what do you think, Bill? 5 or 10 minutes and then come back and pick up with the Haywood?
5 minutes works for me. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know.
I could take a break too.
Time.
I had 2 Diet Cokes during lunch, so I could take a break myself. All right, 5 minutes in.
So 203?
203, Ashley. On it. Not a second later. Sounds good.
Antoine, are you on here still?
I see him, Michelle.
I see him too, but I can't chat him.
He probably fell asleep, Michelle.
Oh, no, not with all this excitement. You know what though? Okay, do you know what the name of our team is for this?
The heading I have across the top says February 2021 board meeting / retreat.
No, I meant our whole team. Okay, don't worry about it.
Okay.
All right.
I'm not the guy to ask the technical stuff, Michelle, as I just made plain with that answer.
All right.
Hey, Jay.
Yeah.
I'm having a heck of a time with trying to get, like the mute mic and the whatever, and even all the conversations are broken. It's the typical mess that I have. It seems like every board meeting, but it seems to be a little bit amplified again today. So I've been looking for a way to send a chat message to Antoine, but I've not seen it yet. But anyway,
All right.
I've just been having a rough time.
The Bondo and baling wire is crapping out on you again.
Yeah, it's typical. But the only redeeming thing here is the Federal Communications Commission has said that we are served because there's somebody in Cummins County that's served and has no problems. It only takes one. It only takes one.
Jay.
Yep.
This is Joe Jordan. Just want to let
Joe.
you know I'm ready to do the presentation. And just a FYI, I'm a part of the opioid task force at Medical Society Medical Board. And something came up about a addition to the SAFE Act, in which, or not addition to the SAFE Act, I'm sorry, that was another bill we looked at. But in regards to pharmacists being able to inject long-acting medications, you're aware of this?
Yeah, there's a bill that has not been introduced yet, but I understand that Representative Sasser is going to introduce that would add administration of injectable drugs to the definition of the practice of pharmacy.
Correct.
So it would open up a lot of opportunities that frankly are long past due being opened up, I think, for pharmacists to do that.
I think it was in the beginning, they were trying to do it in regards to buprenorphine and Sublocade,
Right.
which is odd because neither one of those necessarily have to be done injectable. But it's now been opened up and changed to all long, any long-acting injectable medication. And that would include, of course, some of the potent antipsychotics.
Yeah, the last I saw, Joe, is it wasn't even long-acting injectables. It just an administration of injectable drugs. So
there could have been some confusion in the translation. Yeah. We were on a Zoom call of 30 people. So.
Well, this is all part of a bigger issue about pharmacists' authorization to administer drugs generally, which you'd be shocked to learn, Joe, that some of your friends over at the Medical Society have a conniption fit every time they talk about so I've never been able to understand why it is that it's a pharmacist is capable of doing a clinical assessment for prescribing and appropriate dispensing of a chemotherapeutic agent, but God forbid they be allowed to be trained to start the IV. But for some reason, the MedSoc just gets themselves all in a twist about that.
Well, we can talk about that offline.
Yeah. Oh, I know. That's a separate discussion.
It was,
but yeah, something is. I understand that supposedly, or at least Representative Sasser thinks that the decks are probably clear to get that change made to the definition of the practice of pharmacy. So we'll see.
We'll see. I would anticipate there would be a lively discussion about that.
Of course there will be. Of course, and it'll all be based on the facts and the science and health policy, and not on bottom line number of office visits that somebody might be able to get out of it. I'm sure that won't.
Jay, it's for the children.
Right, for the children. Yeah, that's right.
Veterans, children, law
What
enforcement.
about the children? What about the children? Hey, Joe, are you going to share your screen?
If I'm permitted to do so, and I believe
I
that
can.
I've already took care of that, Jay.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I can share it now if you want.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and pull it up, because we're already at 2:04. Nash is going to have my rear end. Get going here.
Okay, can you see what's there?
Yep. Yep. Somebody's talking about a level 65 something. I don't know what that is.
Yeah. I think that's what it was when I went to pick up Reagan.
Oh, that's Wallace. I heard Reagan mentioned. His granddaughter.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah,
I can see somebody.
I can see your screen. Ashley, I think we're probably ready to go.
Let's see, is Bill and Keith, I don't know if they're there or not.
Sorry.
See Andy and Watt, there's Bill. And
Yep,
Michelle and Keith.
Say Wallace. Yep.
I am here.
All right, brother man.
So if it's okay, I will proceed.
Wallace just won the cuteness contest for today.
Do we need to make a motion that it's okay for Joe to start? Joe, would you like a motion?
No, that's, hey, I just want to make sure I'm following proper parliamentary procedure.
We're ready. So Joe, everybody knows I've given them some background stuff on the Haywood stuff, so everybody knows what this is about. It's absolutely your show.
Okay, just to make it clear, I am not in the running for the cuteness thing. I'm pretty sure I would come in dead last. So I'll just dispense with the formalities. I offer to you today a update with some requests around modifications and the status of the L. Stanley Haywood Recovery Fund. I will be assisted in this and more likely corrected in this by Ms. Cindy Clark, who is co-presenting with me today.
Hey, Sandy.
So I thought I would give y'all a current status of the fund and kind of give you an idea of what's been going on since we put it into action. You can see that in 2018, approximately $50,000 were dispersed across assessment, residential treatment, and outpatient therapy. As we expected, outpatient therapy, there would be more people that would benefit from that, but less money, because less money is given for outpatient therapy than is for residential treatment or assessment. You can see that in 2019, we gave roughly the same amount. And then in 2020, we went up to almost $70,000, which is quite a bit of funds. And I also would point out that we actually stopped dispersing funds from March through August because of a drop in the market. Some of y'all may remember that sometime around February, March of 2020, there was a social issue that occurred that had some deleterious effects on our returns in the market. And basically, when you see refunds, what that means is that a provider discontinued their outpatient therapy, or maybe they didn't go for the assessment, and so that money was sent back to us. And then you'll look at 2021. We have already had 3 people apply for funds to go to residential treatment and have given out $15,000. Cindy, would you like to add anything to this?
Sure, yeah. I can tell you also, though, there have been 3 more applications that have just been received this week. So I anticipate that, the number of scholarship applications will continue to increase as we go along. You may also wonder why the numbers don't seem to add up with regard to student, technician, pharmacist, and the number of applications. It could be that that person got more than one scholarship. So each applicant can get an assessment scholarship, a residential treatment scholarship, and an outpatient therapy scholarship. So if you're wondering why the numbers look odd, that's why. Thanks,
Okay.
Joe.
All right. MS Teams is not showing me y'all's faces, so I'm just going to proceed. I can't see whether you're raising a hand. Please just break in if you have questions, and I'll pause after each slide. So this is a portfolio review of our current asset allocation. Cindy, I know you have some more up-to-date information. So when I'm done with this, but I just want to go over that. You can see approximately 72% of the funds are invested in the equity market, roughly 28% in fixed income. So a total portfolio value as of February 3rd was $1.15 million. So we have continued to generate beyond the $1 million corpus that we keep in reserve in order to fund the Haywood Scholarship Fund. Cindy, any addition to that?
Sure, yeah. And as of about 10 minutes ago, it was at 1,177,630 and some change. So it's up 20-some thousand since your report.
And for the record, we do not have any investment in Bitcoin. So one of the things.
How about GameStop, Joe?
That's what I was wondering.
We put it all in GameStop.
That is no, we're not touching those. In fact, the fund managers would go apoplectic if they heard us even mention those two things. And just for the record, our funds are managed through UBS, and so we receive advice from them in regards to how and what to invest in. So the question that is before the board today, as we ask the question about why would we be coming to the board and asking to add when clearly the account is doing well. So, and this is straight from our fund managers, basically saying that their management style has pretty been proven by what they do. We protect and perform during a pretty volatile time. I referenced that last March we had to stop giving out scholarships because of the drop in the market, but by August we were able to resume giving out scholarships to people for 2020 and managed to give out more than ever before. And they do believe that this current climate with the new administration in Washington really gives us an opportunity to grow that fund even more. So they were asking for an addition of $250,000 for the following reasons. The pandemic's going to start to dissipate. Y'all probably know more about that with vaccine distribution, which has been a focus of the new administration in Washington. Once that's under better control, there'll be a pent-up demand for economic growth is a fairly viable assumption, and I think we're already seeing some heights in the market. Interest rates will be in moderate check for the next foreseeable future, so borrowing costs will remain low, allowing companies to expand. And international investment, we believe, will again move in a more desirable consideration as people start to travel and recover. So these factors, including the growth in the technology sector, our stay-at-home economy, and energy consumption, they believe now is a great opportunity to add $250,000 to the investment portfolio. Now, that's from Jim and Dan. from Joe and Cindy, and I'm not going to speak for Cindy, but I am going to say that we'd really like to be able to continue awarding scholarships even in the tough times. So if there is a major correction in the market, we would like to be able to capitalize on the opportunity to make money and give out scholarships now. Paradoxically, with that tough time, that's when scholarships are most needed. And so we'd like to be able to have those funds available and put them in a safe format. That may mean that we need to talk to our managers about moving out of the equity funds and more into the fixed income. But that's something to be discussed with them if the investment is made and at the direction of this board. The biggest thing that I think is going to result in a need for more funds is we're looking at a proposed change in eligibility for the scholarships for probably the most needed group, which is the pharmacy technicians. And we're going to reference that in just a moment. The Washington Post put out on January 22nd that even for May 2019 through May 2020, which doesn't encompass the pandemic that actually started mostly in February and March and continues to this day, there were more overdose deaths in a one-year period than ever seen before. That is not a record that we want to be setting. And the death rate from overdoses actually accelerated as the epidemic set in. So we're seeing more overdoses and more deaths from overdose. And my hypothesis around that is that there are less resources to treat everyone as a result of the COVID epidemic. And frankly, more treatment means fewer deaths. Cindy, do you have anything you'd like to add to these points?
I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay. So, so we have made some changes already to encourage program participation. For our technicians, we're using quick cup tests, which is an on-site immediate feedback test. And for the 3 urine drug screens per month, if they were doing the regular urine drug screen, it'd be around $150 to $200, which could be a substantial expense for the techs, could be a substantial expense for anyone. But utilizing the quick cup tests managed to keep the cost from $15 to $30. And this is not as accurate, but it is still pretty accurate. And the techs work under supervision. And so our field coordinators are making the workplace monitors aware that the techs are utilizing this system and asking if there's any concerns to give us a call. And if we get a positive on a quick cup, we will follow that up immediately with a urine drug screen to confirm or disprove that positive, because they use an immunoassay type of detection method as opposed to the gas chromatography mass spectrometer that's used for all of our urine drug screens. Also, the use of Zoom technology and saliva tests has made it much easier for a solo provider to screen and has decreased potential COVID-19 exposure. So for our pharmacists that have difficulty in leaving work or, as I said, are a solo provider, we can use Zoom technology and have them do a saliva test while being observed. It's really quite helpful for them and has been a boon to our physician population as well. There is a slight cost increase on that, about $10 to $15 per test, depending on the test that's being done, but has been very well received by our participant population. So we would propose today the possibility of making some eligibility changes. And Cindy, I'll rely on you to add on to this when I'm done with my part.
Sure.
Currently, technicians must have been registered with the board 4 or 5 years and employed as a technician with their employer for the last 2 years. And we've had a number of technicians that for various reasons, have been unable to access scholarships funds because they don't meet both those criteria. They meet one or the other, but they don't meet both. And so we would propose that they be registered for 5 years with the pharmacy board or employed in the same place for the last 2 years. And this, combined with the use of a less expensive testing protocol, we believe will increase technician participation. Cindy, any thoughts?
Yeah, it has been difficult for the technicians, as Joe said, just from a financial standpoint. We encourage their participation. We're concerned about their own personal health and safety, but if we're talking to someone about trying to enroll, you have to give them, make full disclosure of, this is kind of what you can expect to pay each month. And there's numerous people who, just can't afford that. So with the changes to testing that Joe mentioned, I think that will be extremely helpful, that we will get people who are dedicated to the field to be able to remain in the field. Some stats from last year. So NCPHP saw a total of 36 technicians last year. Only 6 of those 36 met both of those criteria. And if it were changed to an or, 13 would meet that criteria. And honestly, not all of them want to participate. Some of them can't afford the other aspects. So I don't imagine that all 13 of those people would apply for scholarship, but it would definitely open the door for more people who wanted to get the help that they would be able to get it.
And we have some other suggestions for increasing contributions to the fund. Employing perhaps a GoFundMe page. We are using that with the veterinary board now to try to establish a scholarship fund. Unfortunately, they aren't able to start a fund like the pharmacy board was. Solicitation emails to persons licensed or registered with the Board of Pharmacy. Fundraising campaign with current drug manufacturers headquartered in North Carolina. Analyze our current contribution structure and how that's working to see if we can find any ways to minimize barriers. Are we making it easy for people when they come to our website to donate? Is a fairly straightforward process. And then we have 2 videos on our website of persons that have been helped by NCPHP. One, a emergency room physician, the other, a physician assistant. And so I think it would be helpful if we could identify and find some participants who have completed the program and have been helped by the L. Stanley Haywood Recovery Fund. Obviously, there's going to be a lag time to do that, because we would feel a little odd about having a video of someone who's currently in the program and asking them to do that. That just doesn't feel cricket, to borrow from our friends across the pond. So that concludes the presentation. I'm going to try to stop presenting here in a moment. Okay, I'm back. So any questions at this time?
Joe, this is Andy Bowman. How are you? Good. Thank you for the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other ancillary folks like dental assistants or dental hygienists that are covered under NCPHP on the dental side?
No, sir. The dental program has what they call the Caring Dental Program, and it is actually a completely separate program. It is very similar to NCPHP, but it's run by a different 501c3.
Okay. The reason I'm bringing this up is, and look, don't take this the wrong way. This is not intended to be inconsiderate of. I want everybody to get help, okay? And there's people that have dedicated their time and energy to being a part of the pharmacy family, and technicians are included in that. But when I start thinking about these resources, I can't help but feel like that we really need to be focusing on pharmacists. They're the ones that have invested $200,000, $300,000 in education to become a pharmacist, and then they run into a problem in their personal life. They end up addicted. To me, we shouldn't be potentially doing things that would cause those folks not to have access to funds because they've been used up by somebody who, in all fairness, and look, this is partly all of our faults as leaders in pharmacy, that a pharmacy technician is not what we want it to be. We would all love for it to be more of a career in all the different places that those folks work. But the fact of the matter is that in a lot of those jobs, it's very transient. And those folks can go get jobs doing a whole lot of other things at a similar, or in some cases, better salary. And for us to invest that kind of money into them on the scholarship end with NCPHP, when they don't really have any investment in the profession other than, yes, I'd like to work here. Yes, they may have gone to a community college and done a training program or something like that. It's just not apples to apples. And so I'm a little hesitant to give those monies away to those folks if there is a need for pharmacists. And I guess I'm saying too much here, but I'll stop at that point.
Well, can I piggyback on that, what Andy's talking about? And I guess my question is, are there instances where we've got a pharmacist that is asking or applying for funds that there's a choice made to not grant funds because they're not available or anything like that? Are we having to turn down any pharmacists that requested or applied for funds?
Joe, can I speak to that?
Sure, I was going to, but go right ahead.
Sure. To my knowledge, there has not been an instance where we've had to pick a pharmacist or a technician. The only time that we have not been able to hand out funds is due to the market. We kind of put a self-imposed limit on there so that it doesn't get down below where it's supposed to. But to my knowledge, no, it hasn't come down to a pharmacist hasn't gotten any because a technician has.
Yeah, and
if there's been a case where that's happened, would there be, where you had to not give resources because of the market, market factors? Is there a case where, if we weren't giving as much out on the technician side, to just put it blankly, would you pull the trigger on a freeze on funds because of the market later, if that makes sense? Would it have occurred as soon? I guess I'm trying to make sense. I don't know whether that made sense or not.
Yeah, let me just state that, Andy, the issues you brought up were the very issues that led to concerns that we would potentially not be able to fund for pharmacists if we funded every technician that asked, which is why we put the criteria in place and made it be and. There would still be the criteria that they would have to be employed for at least 2 years or registered for 5. And we could return in a period of time and see if any of that came up. Part of the reason that we considered asking for additional funds was that would provide an additional buffer in case we did run into that. But because we report to this entity every year, we don't anticipate that it would go on for long. Most of the time, at least the only time we've had to stop giving out scholarships, as Cindy said, was when the market crashed in March due to the pandemic. And then once it recovered, we were giving scholarships out to the people that were applying. Now, between March and August, no one got them, neither pharmacist nor technician. Jay, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick background for everybody to go back to the sort of the creation of the Haywood Fund. And I know some of the board members were around and some were not at the time it was created. But with respect to technicians, in fact, one of the impetuses, or one of the primary impeti, I don't know what the plural of impetus is, but one of the main motivating factors behind the creation of this fund was not just a concern, but a demonstrable fact that that a lot of times recovery services were not going to be available to a technician or a student, period, because they tend to lack the resources that they would need to obtain help. And so the line that was drawn was sort of, yes, there was a concern or an intent at the very beginning of the creation of this fund that it not become a fund so that just any technician who happens to go to work as a registered technician and is working at, ABC Pharmacy for 6 months and then says, I think I have a substance use disorder, and then they run and get treatment for that and then aren't technicians anymore. And sort of a concern about sort of what I think you were touching on, Andy, is the notion of potential depletion of funds and not being able to use those across the board. And for those who are really committed to pharmacy, and not because we were rewarding people in some abstract sense for being committed to pharmacy, but what we wanted to do was make sure that if folks are committed to pharmacy, it's a career sort of thing. We want them to be safe. And one of the ways we can protect the public health and safety is to make these resources for treatment and assessment available to them and accessible to them. So I just don't want it to get lost in talking about technicians, that having a path for some technicians to get access to these funds was a primary goal of the creation of the Haywood Fund. And we can argue about whether we set the right balance with the criteria or not, which I think is exactly what Joe and Cindy are talking about. But just that little perspective on how it came to be. And same is true for students, pharmacy students, the same thing.
Well, let me just clarify too that I definitely am not in any way, shape, or form trying to imply that we don't try to meet that need. And somehow exclude. I mean, I don't mean to be saying that at all. I was just sort of a curiosity on my part, because I do believe that, we all made a comment earlier when we were talking about that other case that, I said we all fail when we aren't do what we can do to try to help somebody that's in trouble. It doesn't matter whether they're a pharmacist or a technician. I'm totally committed to that. So.
Same thing. I hope I prefaced my questions and my comments correctly, but I feel the same way. I just want to make sure that, we're making a good decision, and I want us to think through changing it from and to or, what impact is that and or that or going to have.
Right. I absolutely understood that. I just wanted to make sure everybody remembered sort of at the beginning. No, I think we're all coming at this for the same purposes.
And Joe, with your ask of an additional $250,000, and with the anticipation, hopefully, of the markets, doing well, over the next year, and God only knows what's going to happen. But that will indeed create more funds if we need them. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And just for the two board members that spoke, it was clear to me that you were not attempting to leave technicians out in the cold, but dealing with the very hard issues. So yes, Keith, it would absolutely provide that buffer, and that's why we're bringing it to the board at this time to be able to potentially have that available. And frankly, I think our need is going to increase. Y'all, I'm just going to tell you this. All evidence is that as the pandemic kind of goes down, our referrals are going to skyrocket. We're already, poor Cindy walked into my office last week and said, okay, I've got 8 referrals and it's only Wednesday. And, like 3 in the last day. So I would anticipate very similar to, if you'll pardon the use of a wartime metaphor, soldiers don't normally start displaying their PTSD and trauma-related symptoms in the midst of the battle. It's when the battle is over. And I think our pharmacists, our pharmacy technicians, our other healthcare workers. When the pandemic starts to subside, we're going to see a significant increase. And we're already seeing an increase. We're monitoring more people now than we have ever monitored in the history of NCPHP. We're over 300. And some of those, as you can imagine, the Board of Pharmacy and the pharmacy referrals are our second largest referral source. So I would anticipate there's definitely going to be a need. I don't think that's going to be an issue. And I think if we make this change, we'll be able to meet more people's needs without putting the fund in jeopardy with the addition of the additional funds.
This is just spitballing an idea, but what, you know, I mean, I totally get where Andy's coming from as far, you know, and Wallace, as far as, you know, we want to help everybody, but, you know, the pharmacists who are have made the most investment have got they got the most to lose by not having access to these funds. And, you know, is there a way that we could put some kind of stopgap or measure in place that, you know, once the funds get to a certain level, then we may have to evaluate as far as, you know, what, you know, tech, you know, what's available to techs if it does get down to below a certain point. I don't know if that made any sense or not. But,
yeah, I would have. Well, Cindy, you monitor this more closely than I. What are your thoughts on that? I don't want to speak for you.
Sure.
Nor do I want to ever be accused of mansplaining. So.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. So myself and another person in the office kind of check on the fund and manage it and that sort of stuff. So we have kind of a self-imposed, when it gets down to $20,000 that are available to us, we kind of cut it off just because we don't, you know, the market fluctuates and we don't want to go down below that. So, you know, maybe there is the possibility of kind of having a couple of cutoffs of, you know, whether it gets to 30,000 and kind of cap it at techs, and then, you know, what is below is kind of a safety net for pharmacists to use before it gets too low. So that's an option. I mean, we always check the fund amount before we distribute anything.
One thing I would jump in. Cindy, were you done?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me lower my hand now. It seems to me that we could utilize the initial level of 1.1 as the place at which we would stop our technician involvement and keep that 100 available to pharmacists if we had the additional funds available as requested. I'm kind of thinking out loud, y'all, as we're talking about this. So that, you know, I'm not tied to any particular outcome, but that is something that occurred to me, is if we did have the addition of the funds, we could use that 1.1 initial gift, and it would be an easy reference point in changing the parameters around it to say anything, you know, below 1.1 will be available only to pharmacists till the $1 million mark, which is never touched. Just a thought.
And this is Ashley. I just, you know, I'm going back to what Wallace and Andy said. I mean, we want to make sure this is accessed by all. But, you know, over the last 20 years, what I've seen in my own profession is that, you know, sometimes the pharmacy technician role is more of a stepping stone to other professions. And my concern is, I think most of my colleagues shares is that although we want to help those pharmacy technicians that are career technicians, we know that those pharmacists are the ones that we really, you know, that may need this the most because they've invested their life in this and this is their career. So that's my only concern, is I want to make sure that, you know, the funds are there. And I love Keith's idea about possibly doing something with like a stop loss so that we can make sure that pharmacists have the funds and it doesn't run out by the end of the year.
So we can.
This is Michelle. I just have
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I just have a quick question. I just got a little confused when Cindy was talking about the $20,000 and then you went back to the $1.1 million. Is she talking about getting down to $20,000 above that $1 million?
Yes.
To be that? Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
Yeah, Michelle, I think that what Cindy described was is under the agreement, the $1 million corpus is held as you can't touch it, and you can't give out scholarships if the corpus drops below $1 million. It's the earnings on the million that are what fund the scholarships. So I think what Cindy said was you sort of have an internal control that if the total fund balance gets to $1,020,000, you stop giving scholarships to avoid accidentally dipping below the million if there's a flux. But if there were an additional, if the board put another $250,000 into the fund, then the idea might be if the fund balance got to $1.1 million, no more tech aid could be given, but you could continue to give pharmacist aid down to the 1,020,000. Is that right, Sandy?
Yep, you got it right. Thanks, Jay.
That's
To me,
exactly it, Jay.
it doesn't exist. It's untouchable.
Right. And to be
Okay,
clear,
got
and Joe, this is something I don't want to, I hopefully don't throw a spanner into the works, but thinking through it is that if the board made another contribution of $250,000, then would it be, and this would conflict with what we just described. So I want to make sure we get some clarity on what the thought would be on that, is that if the board gave another $250,000, one way to do that would be to say you amend the agreement to make the fund corpus $1.25 million. And so all earnings off the 1.25 million fund scholarships.
Mhm.
Or is it your thought that you'd want to see $250,000 put into the fund, but the inviolate corpus, as it were, it remains at $1 million?
That was my thought. Of course, this is all up to discussion among the board members because we've been able to maintain and generate utilizing that previous model. But are anticipating with the addition of funds, we'd be able to generate even more.
Right.
So,
and I'm asking that, Joe, because if the board, I've got some suggestions about a process if the board wants to go forward, but there are some nonprofit and some agency issues we would need to work out with. I would suggest Bob Saunders, who did the original agreement. We would have to have him run down, part of what makes this agreement that we've done something that you don't have to worry about the state auditor or somebody else comes along and throws a fit about is that, the $1 million we put in there, we can get it back.
Exactly.
And we would need to consult with Bob about the two options, about whether it's a $250,000 that can be spent down immediately or whether it would need to be added to the corpus and so only earnings off the additional 250 would be available. I just want to, again, I'm not trying to get murky or detailing, but that's just something I don't know enough to have an opinion about what we'd need to do with that. I'd want to get Bob Saunders involved to tell us that.
Well, that absolutely has to occur.
Yeah.
We're in the very preliminary of thinking, could we do this? Is there even a reason to do this? If we all agree there's a reason, then we can figure out the going forward.
Totally on board. And I'm sorry, that was probably more detail than I should have brought up, but.
Actually, Jay, that was very helpful. My only other question is, do we know about how much each scholarship is?
It depends upon what is being scholarshiped, if that's actually a word. For example, residential treatment is limited to $5,000. Outpatient assessment is, I believe, $2,000, and outpatient therapy is $2,500. Cindy?
Yeah, Joe,
is that true?
it's a $5,000 max for inpatient treatment, $2,500 max for assessment, and $2,500 max for outpatient treatment.
With thereby proving that I'm not the one writing the checks, which is exactly how it should be.
And that
I just happen to have the agreement in front of me. That's
so if it's 5,000 for inpatient treatment, that's about a tenth of the total need. Am I right? Or am I overestimating the cost of inpatient treatment?
Bill, I was under the impression as well that inpatient treatment was about 50 grand. Joe, can you give us an average on that?
Well, it depends upon the level of treatment that they receive. So it can be anywhere from $18,000 to $54,000. $18,000 if they're in treatment for 21 to 28 days, and then if they do the full gamut of treatment, which is what 9 times out of 10 we're going to recommend for a pharmacist who is returning back to, for lack of a better term, a trigger-rich environment, that they go to 90 days of treatment. And that can vary anywhere from $38,000 to $54,000, depending on the treatment center they select.
Is that 54,000 the one in Malibu that we see commercials for?
Yeah, we don't use those guys.
Passages Malibu.
Any place that guarantees recovery, we stay away from. And if it looks nicer than any of the places that most of us can go for vacation, probably not.
10-4.
It's just expensive.
It is expensive, Bill. It is expensive.
So when I'm sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
I just have one more quick question. So this is only for a technician. If they have to go into this is the reason we're looking at this for technicians, is because they can't afford the potentially $54,000 or $18,000.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
They sometimes, Ms. Corbin, they can't even afford the outpatient therapy.
Okay. All right. No, that's okay. That makes sense.
No, that's confusing to me. It costs less to treat a pharmacist than it does a technician, or more, or the same?
No, it's all the same, but I'm saying even if we found a way for them to go to, say, outpatient therapy, because they just could not afford to go to residential, even with the help of the scholarship, sometimes they can't even afford, Bill, to go to outpatient therapy. And so the addition of this scholarship can be a lifesaver if they're eligible for it. And that's why we were proposing the changes in eligibility. Cindy, did you want to speak to this?
No, I think you covered it. That's good.
Okay.
So when we funded this, our original gift was $1 million, and we added 100,000, if I'm not mistaken, for the first year to give the fund time to accumulate some interest income.
Correct.
And then we talked about the need for more funds in the second year, or not?
We did not.
Okay.
No,
so
this is the first discussion that the board's ever had about potentially contributing more board funds into the Haywood Fund. We have set up a means by which pharmacists can donate individually
right.
to the Haywood Fund.
Right.
Okay, my last question. So the $1 million, to whom does that $1 million belong?
The Board of Pharmacy.
Okay, so the Board of and this 250 would also belong to the Board of Pharmacy.
Yes, I don't want it to ever belong to NCPHP. I don't need that headache.
Okay, I just trying to make sure I'm understanding. Okay.
It actually belongs, yeah, that's basically correct. Under the terms of the trust, the $1 million principal can only be used to generate earnings to provide scholarship assistance. And there's a provision in the agreement that allows, I think, either party to terminate with 90 days notice. And upon termination, the $1 million principal would revert back to the board's control.
And the only thing I would add to that is any additional funds beyond that $1 million would also revert to the board.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
But I thought from earlier conversations, we were talking about an additional 25,000 to be made available immediately for treatment that may surface very soon. And then Jay, you started talking about whether that was the right way or whether to make it part of the original 1 million. So
right.
Isn't that yet to be determined?
Yeah, I think that's, I think that if the board, my suggestion would be in terms of thinking about process would be this. If the board is supportive of the notion of increasing or providing another $250,000 into the Haywood Fund, I would suggest that that Ashley appoint 2 members of the board to serve as a committee, and we would, and of course, Joe and Cindy would participate on that, and I would be ex officio on that, and we would bring in Bob Saunders, who's the attorney that did the original trust agreement, and we would say, okay, the board wishes to provide an additional $250,000 into the Haywood Fund. Bob, tell us legally what's the best way, or what's the way we need to do that to minimize the chance of any unfounded but accusation that it's not an appropriate use of board funds. And he would tell us what the options were on how to do that, and the committee could, based on that advice, could both make a recommendation to the full board about how to implement that. And part of that would be a recommendation to the full board about any changes that it wanted to make with respect to technician eligibility and or sort of stop points in fund level to preserve funds for pharmacists if they start running low. That was not as elegant as I wanted. Cindy Clark stated that better, but that's the idea of it.
Can we go back to slide 3, Joe? Current status and historical funding.
Yeah, let me
review.
See if I can pull that up. So.
My question fundamentally is, what's your rate of return? What kind of return are they giving you? And how much do you have available now for treatment?
Okay, I'm sorry, my computer's running a little slow, but I will
It looks like the total portfolio value is 1.15 million.
Correct.
Or 151,000 above the $1 million.
Correct.
So isn't that, can't you tap into that $151,000 now?
We are.
Okay.
And absolutely, we are doing that.
And how low will you let it get before you stop awarding scholarships?
$1,020,000 is.
That's your cutoff.
I'll try to share screen here if that's okay.
So that gives you 131,000 to award.
Let's see. Are y'all getting? It says someone else has started sharing, so I don't know that I'm able to open my share tray. Yeah, there at current right now there is Are y'all seeing this now?
I'm not, but I have it
Yes,
open.
there you
And,
go.
oh, there it is. There it is. Got it.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, went away.
All right, I'm gonna pop it back up there in just a minute, y'all. Give me two.
And I can tell you that the current available balance for scholarships is 178,000.
So it's going up with the market at this time. Okay, so let me get back here and I will share the tray. All right, looks like I'm presenting now, and you can see that this is as of February 3rd. And as the market has continued to go up, we're actually above this by, I think, $20,000, correct, Cindy?
Yeah, now it's at 178.
178, so $25,000, or 27 to be specific. And yes, all of that is available for scholarships, but as Cindy referenced, if that money is given out and we got down to right around the $1,020,000 mark, Bill, we would stop awarding scholarships. And we have just, from an internal perspective, picked that $20,000 buffer because the market will be fluctuating, and generally at that point it is trending down. And so that's kind of our break point to say, okay, let's stop awarding scholarships, see where the market's going to settle, and then go from there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, sir?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Jay, are we at the point where we feel as a board that we can assign a group to start working on this, our committee to start working on this?
Yeah, I think if we do that, though, I think what we ought to get is a sense from the board. I wouldn't want to put a committee together if the board is not inclined to add more money to the fund. If there's not a board desire to do that, there's not much point in having the committee. But if there is a desire to supplement the Haywood Fund, then yes, I would recommend appointing a committee, and you could assign those at the end of today, Ashley, as we work through everything that needs to be assigned, that we would appoint a committee that would be tasked with proposing amendments to the trust agreement to add that money to the fund. And that's where I talked about we need to figure out with Saunders what's the way that we need to do that protects our interest and PHP's interest. And then you could also task the committee, once the committee knows how it could structure the additional money, then I think that committee could talk about a recommendation to the full board about if and how to tweak the technician eligibility requirements in light of that change. Joe, does that sound like a reasonable process to you?
Absolutely. In fact, it seems like both reasonable and prudent. The other thing I would add, Jay, is that the amount could also be determined by that committee.
That's true. But the request is $250,000, and you've all got. I did have JP take a look at our finances, and you have the memo from JP, and JP says that if the board desires to increase the Haywood Fund by $250,000 or any amount up to that, you'll see that we would easily be able to meet that without any negative effect on board operations or cash flows.
So
Okay.
personally, go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, personally, I think with COVID, that need is probably going to be there. So I propose that, we obviously have to make a decision about the money. 250 looks like what we have available and that we can swing that. But I definitely think a committee is necessary to determine how we feel about moving forward with that and where that money should go. Is anybody opposed or agree with that?
I agree.
Well, if we're going to discuss the amount, yes. I'm really struggling with, even if we put another $1 million in there, dollars in there, there's still going to be more need than there is money. At the same time, maybe we can't help everybody, but we can help somebody. I can't think of any unintended consequences of adding money. Jay, have there been any pushback from a large number of pharmacists?
No, to the contrary. Every comment I've ever received from any pharmacist in this state about the Haywood Fund, and every CE I do around the state, I mention the Haywood Fund and what it does, how it does it, and all those things. I have never received a single negative comment about the fund and what it does. Precisely the contrary.
And Joe, do you have a feel for how many pharmacists? And maybe I'm not up to date on how often or how long they've had the opportunity to contribute, but individual pharmacists, when we renew, we can make a donation. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How much money is that bringing in, and how long has that been going on? And is it just being ignored, or?
I can speak to that. Is that okay, Joe?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. So we just started having the ability on our website for folks to be able to make donations starting last April. So for the most recent renewal season is the first time that folks have been able to donate. So from April to year end 2020 was $1,340. So if you renewal starts November, is that right?
Right, yeah. November 1st.
Okay, so there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 donations from that renewal season.
Well, it's not a lot. And those are unrestricted funds, basically.
Yeah, those funds go straight to PHP for use for granting scholarships. Since they are not part of the $1 million corpus that were in there, they can be used immediately and fully for scholarship aid.
Okay. And am I correct, Jay, that you said it looks like to you, or you think that the way to handle this, if we approve additional funding, would be to increase the corpus, which would just take us from 1 million to 1.25 million to generate more income?
That's the question that I want to consult with Bob Saunders about, to tell us. I mean, in the abstract, it's just a policy preference. Would you rather contribute strictly to the corpus and preserve a larger corpus that throws off more revenue, or do you want to have that available immediately for more scholarships, or some portion of it available immediately? And that's a policy choice. I would want the committee to work with Bob, so Bob could tell us legally, here's how it would need to be structured, or what your structure options would be. Yeah. And then the committee would recommend to the full board based on that. I just don't know the answer, Bill, to that question.
If we pick the former, then it's not going to be immediately available, which was a main part of Joe's request, was to meet more of an immediate need. Am I right, Joe? Cindy?
Well, I think the need is going to be, as you referenced, the need's always going to be there. The question is, how do we do this in a way that benefits the licensees of your board in the best way. And that part, I think, will have to be determined through the committee.
Yeah.
I do see the need, as Dr. Duggan said, it's coming. And we're seeing the beginnings of that now. An increased need. Need is always there, but I'm seeing more of it. And as Cindy said, we had, 13 people that could have applied, but only 6 were able to due to the restrictions.
And I would
think,
say those
I
6
think that's 2 issues. I think the increase in funds is a separate issue than eligibility for technicians. Personally, I mean, the committee could address both, but I'm more focused right now on the funding.
Is there anything, and this is a little off topic, but is there anything that would prohibit? Well, this is based upon the fact that there was only $1,900, $2,000 of people volunteering for the substance. Is there an opportunity to, once we look at potentially increasing dues later, adding a part that where that money is earmarked to go towards this? So an extra $5 in everybody's, or whatever.
Oh, in terms of it, Michelle, you mean in terms of like a $5 add-on to renewal every year, that kind of thing?
To help.
Yeah, we couldn't do that because we don't have this. We only have a statutory authority to charge $135 for renewal. I mean, I suppose the board could decide that it wanted to make some programmatic contribution going forward, but in terms of sort of putting a Haywood Fund surcharge on the renewal fee, that we wouldn't be able to do.
So
okay, thank you.
So are we comfortable, board, assigning a committee for this and moving forward with this? That is a thumbs up from Keith. And thumbs up for Andy. And Wallace is thumbs up. So
Michelle's yes.
Michelle and Bill are all good with that. So Jay, is that something we can decide at the end of the meeting to do the committee, to assign the committee members for that as we look at other committees formed?
Yeah, I think I've written it down on my list of committee assignments we need made, and I think what we can do is when we get to the end of today, like we talked about earlier, we'll say, well, these are the things that we need to assign board members to. How do folks want to be assigned?
Okay, that
put a little asterisk next to my name on this one, Jay, because I am the representative to the NCPHP, so I'm already on their board, so it might be a place that I should fit in, or maybe a disqualifier, but probably a good spot for me.
Joe and Cindy, thank you so much for that presentation and all the questions that we asked you. It was very thorough, and we appreciate that.
Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, y'all.
Save lives. We appreciate it. Take
Indeed. Care. All right. Thanks, y'all. Ashley, what's your pleasure? You want to move on to the next thing, or do folks need a short break?
I vote we move forward, but I can't speak for everyone else.
I'm seeing a lot of, I'm seeing this. Roll on. All right. Well, let's back up then. Next item is the FDA's Memorandum of Understanding. And the only thing I have to add from the report at the board meeting back in January is that I received 3 additional comments before the February 1st deadline on whether the board should enter into the MOU. Each of those commenters are compounding pharmacists in North Carolina, and each of the 3 strongly believed that the Board of Pharmacy should sign on to the MOU. Each of the 3 are compounding pharmacies that do serve patient populations, mostly in adjacent states, and each of which were concerned that if the board were not a signatory to the MOU and pharmacies in North Carolina then became subject to the 5% interstate distribution rule, that would have a material and negative impact on their compounding operations. So that to restate the tally, then that was 3 comments strongly supportive of entering into the MOU. 1 comment from a pharmacist that just said, I don't think the board should enter into the MOU, but did not explain anything more than that, no why or the like. So we've talked about the MOU. We can certainly talk about it more, but I think we're probably getting down to a position to start deciding whether we're going to sign on to the MOU. And the only thing I would suggest that we would need to think about as a prerequisite is, if it were the will of the board, that we would use the NABP data collection system to collect the compounding data that we would be required to collect under the MOU, that we would need to first engage in a rulemaking to require reporting of that data to the NABP system. And once, hopefully, that rulemaking was completed, we would then be in a position to sign on to the MOU, if that's what y'all want to do. So that's the lay of the land right now. So what I would love to know, or would hope we might be able to get a decision on today, is, does the board want to enter into the MOU? And if the answer is yes, that we make a decision. My suggestion would be that if the answer to that is yes, that Clint and I would then be responsible after this meeting for drafting up a proposed rule, data reporting rule, that we would bring back to you at the March meeting to start the rulemaking process for that.
So Jay, is the board going to have to expend substantial resources if we sign the MOU?
No. If NABP had not been given the grant by the FDA to develop a data collection system, we would have. We would have had to build out a data collection system, link it to the FDA. Probably would have had to consider bringing on at least another half of an FTE to deal with that. But because FDA gave NABP that grant money to set up the data collection, we're really not going to see any appreciable increase in the resources we have to expend, because aside from the data collection bill, the only things that the MOU require us to do are the things we do already, which is investigate complaints, let FDA know if we've gotten them, that sort of thing. So
it seems to me like this is a lot of effort for a very, very few number of pharmacies.
In what sense?
Well, I guess in the sense that, let's say the pool of all permits is 5,000, maybe 50 of them are affected, or maybe 100 of them, if that, would be affected by this MOU.
I can't speak to exactly how many permits would be affected in the state or nationally.
I'm not trying to argue against it. I'm just
no. I know you're just trying to figure out.
I'm just thinking through. Andy, hush. Is that a for or against? It just occurred to me the other night or the other day that, this is a lot of effort. But it has the potential to affect a lot of people's ability to get compounded medications too. So,
yeah, my personal view is that there's little, if any, downside to our entering into this agreement. Again, because the baseline obligations in terms of investigation, and we do that anyway. Okay. Now, if we were a board of pharmacy that did not have the kinds of inspection and investigative resources and personnel that we do, obviously that's a totally different calculus. If we were to say, well, we're going to have to go out and hire 5 investigators to be, but we've got a great investigative an inspection department, thanks to the support y'all have given over the years. So we don't need to add anything to that. So for our board, there's not much. And NABP takes the data collection infrastructure cost completely off our plate. So that leaves us with a cost of almost nothing. And the downside, I think, to not, whether it's, in North Carolina, whether it would be 10 compounders or 50 or however many, there would still, if we don't sign it, there would be some number of compounding pharmacies in North Carolina that would potentially have their ability to supply compounded medications to patients who need it curtailed, and in some cases maybe in a pretty serious way.
Border pharmacists who are going to be affected in an unintended way. I'm fine moving forward with it, personally. Where'd everybody go?
Yeah, I lost video, I think, of my own video and everybody else's, but I can hear everybody.
Okay.
So Bill is good moving forward with this. Do we have anyone else that feels the same as Bill?
I agree with Bill, and I trust Bill as the compounding guy in the room to think about the intangibles that I might not think about. So it sounds like the right thing to do to me.
I would agree. Wallace, Keith, Michelle, if you're still on the call, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't have a problem. I think that's, I would defer also to Bill, quite frankly.
I'm good with it moving forward.
I am as well.
All right, Jay. So it looks like we are good with moving forward on that.
So can we, and we don't need a motion on this or anything, I just need a sense of the room, as it were. Again, what I would propose as the path forward is that what we know is that you guys want to enter into the MOU. What we need to get accomplished so that when we enter into the MOU, we're able to satisfy our obligations immediately, is we need to go ahead and move forward with a rulemaking that we need to put a rule in place that would say, if you're a compounding pharmacy, you're going to need to report the following data to the NABP data collection system. Obviously, we'll work on the exact words of this. Get that rule in place. And so assuming we were able to get that, and I think we would be able to get that done, of course, get that in place, when it became effective, then we'd be able to sign on to the MOU. Does that, and so what we would do is Clint and I would get together and have a proposed rule for the March meeting on that.
Is that any compounder, whether they ship interstate or not?
That's part of what I think Clint and I will need to talk to the NABP people to make sure that we're real clear on who's going to report and how, so that we can write the rule. I assume that the answer is you report if you're shipping interstate, and not if you're not. But it may be that for data collection purposes, even if you're not shipping interstate, they would want a 0 report on that. But I would need to figure that out with NABP.
That'd be a big burden on the people that are, occasional compounders.
Yeah, that's
on the non-sterile side.
Right. I like I say, I think the answer is, if you're not shipping or distributing or dispensing compounds across state lines, you don't have to report. But obviously, I'll get clarity on that, Bill, and we can come
That's
back.
going to affect long-term care pharmacies if they compound in Hickory and send it to South Carolina.
Correct. But remember, we've laid the groundwork for this, right? That the reporting will be by use of a business e-profile number.
Right.
And we got every pharmacy in North Carolina a business e-profile number, and all new permits have to get one. So the physical act of logging on and reporting will be a 1-minute process. Now, clearly, a compounding pharmacy is going to have to gather their own data, and how long it takes them to gather their own data is going to vary. But
is that a one time a year report?
Yes.
Okay.
an annual report.
Okay. Thank you.
Could everyone toggle your cameras on and off? It looks like might have had a blip there for a second.
I toggled and mine came back up.
Perfect.
Oh, look at Keith.
Mine,
Everybody's coming back.
mine won't toggle right now, but it's my issue. So,
All right, we good.
but I'm here. But I'm here.
Michelle, your voice is as beautiful as it always is.
Oh, you're so sweet.
Full of shit might be a better. But I'll go with yours.
You didn't hear that? You didn't hear all of that? Oh, you're so sweet.
Bless your heart.
Bless your heart. That's
There
right.
you go.
All right, well, that makes sense to me then. Clint, just what I will do before I drag you into this is I've got NABP Executive Committee on Thursday. I'll go ahead and set up with Melissa Madigan an opportunity for you and I to plug in with her and make sure we've got the specifics of what that system is so we can write a rule accordingly. And Clint's staring into the distance, so I assume he heard that. Yeah, all right. Perfect.
All right, Jay, we ready to move on to the limited service permit?
I am if y'all are.
Yes, sir.
I think it's time for at least a 5-minute dialogue.
Ashley, what do you think? 325, Ashley?
Sure.
All righty.
Got to get rid of some coffee. Thanks. I'm going to put the sergeant at arms in charge.
Wallace, you getting some sunshine down your way?
Yes, thank goodness. I'll tell you what, this has been unreal. I mean, you walk across the yard and it is literally like a sponge. I mean,
Oh, that's how mine is. I can't even walk in it. It's almost like your septic tank's overflowed in a whole yard.
exactly. And we had a bunch of wind down here. I mean, today is windy as all get out. The river is just like crazy. And last night they had some tornado warnings and stuff across the sound from us, down in around Terrell County, Columbia, Washington County, Hyde County, Dare County, and even further down toward Jacksonville, I think, and Moorhead. So it's pretty some real, must have been some really bad weather last night. I guess I slept through it all, but it was, I mean, there was a ton. I haven't really been out on to look at the ditches or whatever, but there's a ton of water, that's come even from between last night and this morning. So.
Yeah, it started raining hard here probably about 6:30, and it went until I went to sleep probably around 10:30. Still going strong.
Yeah, it's crazy time. It's weird weather, but it's so wet. I can't remember, but I'm sure we've got more rain during a hurricane event, but literally it's just, I mean, this has been over days. I mean, it's just crazy. So.
Were y'all talking about that tornado that hit down at Sunset Beach yesterday?
Well, I know there were warnings down in that area and everything. I haven't had a chance to check any news things to see what kind of damage or anything.
It was bad. A neighborhood down just outside of Sunset Beach got hit. Last I saw, 3 people were confirmed dead and 10 people were still missing. And that I forget the name of the neighborhood, but and I don't know if Andy's back on, but Michael Adams, the dean of Campbell School of Pharmacy, he has a house down near Sunset Beach. But I checked in with Michael today, and he said fortunately they were not affected.
Oh, good. Obviously,
yeah, pretty bad.
I've been on campus today, so I haven't seen him, but that's good to hear. Dang. Can you imagine if the jet stream had been just a little bit lower and we had been in the low 30s, high 20s over the last week? Can you imagine?
No.
I'd rather have had the snow than all this just rain crap. So I can go play in the snow.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and throw a disclaimer out. My crew just pulled up, so I'll minimize the noise as much as I can.
That's happy noise, Keith. That's happy noise.
Most of the time, yes.
Jay, I was staring into space when you were talking to me because I was crafting that email explaining how verbs work.
I saw that. When I saw his initial email come in, I thought, my God, man, retire. Just retire. Y'all,
I cannot answer your question because it is hypothetical. Yes, yes. The question was, in the future, what is going to happen? Right. You have gotten the concept.
Y'all, we're talking about another attorney. This is not a pharmacist anyway. Sometimes it's important in life to know when to walk away, and some people have trouble with that. That's what we're dealing with. Well, I think we're ready. Michelle, wait, make sure Michelle's back.
I am here.
Hey, Michelle. All right. Well, folks, the next item on the agenda is potential rulemaking concerning limited service permits. And of course, y'all know the background on this. We've talked about it at a couple of meetings, and Ashley appointed Bill and Wallace as a committee, and to look at this and to help staff get through this matter. And they did that and have provided tremendous input. And Crystal and Chase have really pulled a laboring oar on. Chase is now known to us as our expert data analyst here at the board, but they did amazing work pulling together data and recommendations. So to frame the issue, we have a definition of something called a limited service permit in our rules. It's really not much of a definition. It's very hard to tell what is or could be a limited service permit. And there's also a general lack of clarity about how pharmacist manager responsibilities apply when it comes to a limited service permit. And so this task was to review our existing limited service permit census, and then do some thinking about whether we could do some rulemaking to accomplish two principal goals. Number one, to provide clarity as to what types of pharmacy practices are eligible for a limited service permit. And number two, to provide clarity as to what pharmacist manager responsibilities are for those limited service permits. And so after a lot of work and the committee really could not come up with a new definition of a limited service permit that was any better than the utterly unhelpful definition that exists in the rules today. So instead, the committee is making a recommendation that the rule be amended to provide that certain categories of pharmacy practices are eligible to obtain a limited service permit, and for each of those categories to provide some clarity as to how pharmacist manager responsibilities apply, most specifically with regard to physical presence requirements. So that is what the committee has done. That's what the memo is. And I will stop. And certainly I don't want to get in the way of Wallace and Bill, who are exceptionally helpful on the policy issues on this, but just want to make sure everybody clear on what the goal is, and then we can go through the specific recommendations on those. Looks like everybody's clear or sufficiently bored of me talking about it, so I'll take that. I'll take that. So what you're going to see in this memo are six. I'm getting some sort of background noise. I'm going to pause for a second.
It's me chomping on peanuts.
I don't think that's it. Sounds like
it sounds like pages turned.
It sounds like somebody turning pages or something.
Yeah, I would apologize. I was looking for that last document that we were working off of, and thought it was in a file folder, and apparently it's not. So I'm not sure what I did.
It's it. Are you looking? Do you have access, Wallace, to the?
Yeah, I've got access to the thing. I was just looking for the one I had my notes on.
I got you. Well, so what we are proposing are 6 different categories of pharmacy practices that would be eligible for a limited service permit. And let's pause there just to reorient everybody. So what does a limited service permit get you under North Carolina law? Right now, the only clear thing it gets you under North Carolina law is if you're a pharmacist manager of a limited service permit, you can be pharmacist manager on other permits as well. The default rule under North Carolina, of course, is you can only be the pharmacist manager of one permit. And the policy behind that is, as you know, the pharmacist manager is responsible and accepts responsibility for the legal operation of a pharmacy. And so the pharmacist manager really is the hub of the entire means by which you regulate the practice of pharmacy in this state.
Only one full service permit. Did you say that?
Correct. Only one full service permit at a time. If you're a limited service permit PM, you can be a PM on other permits as well. So looking at the historic use of limited service permits and what the committee felt were should continue, and that's really what we're talking about, should continue to be limited service permits. The committee recommends a rulemaking that would provide that the following categories of practices would be required to be a limited service permit, but would be eligible to be a limited service permit. The first is an automated medication system at a healthcare facility. I think you all know, in fact, Keith and Ashley, I don't know whether some of you probably have a pharmacy permit that's limited to operate an automated dispensing device. That's a very common use currently of limited service permits for what I think are pretty obvious reasons with that. And we would propose that they would be classified as eligible for a limited service permit, and with respect to pharmacist manager responsibilities would specify that a pharmacist manager of a limited service permit for an automated dispensing device would be required herself or a pharmacist designated by the pharmacist manager to conduct an in-person visit to the healthcare facility where the automated medication system is at least quarterly to review operations and the like. Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
No, for clarity, briefly, they need a permit because they're storing drugs at that location. Is that?
Storing and dispensing. I mean, the machine is dispensing drugs. So that's why a permit is required under North Carolina law. For similar reasons, some of you, and Ashley, you may do this at one of your facilities. This is sort of the lower tech version of an automated dispensing device. There's a provision in our health system pharmacy rules that talk about auxiliary drug inventories. Wallace, you remember when we came up with that term? That was the term out of the big health system rule rewrite back around 2008, I think. And some healthcare facilities, and very often this is a hospice facility, they may not even have an automated dispensing device. They may have an auxiliary drug inventory, a kit. We would say that you can, for the same reasons that an automated dispensing device is appropriate for limited service, that these kits at hospice facilities, the same thing, and with the same pharmacist manager requirements. Either the pharmacist manager or the pharmacist manager's designee has to do an in-person visit at least quarterly to check and make sure that things are as they should be. The third category would be a facility where nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, or registered nurses dispense drugs under the oversight of a pharmacist. I think you all know that our 1700 rules specify dispensing PAs and NPs, what they can do. And indeed, that rule itself specifies a weekly review requirement in there. Registered nurses are allowed to dispense under North Carolina law at health departments and only health departments, and they dispense off of a limited formulary. And I think most of y'all are familiar with what that formulary is from the rules, but we would propose that in each of these circumstances, a limited service permit is allowable. And with respect to pharmacist manager requirements, would clearly specify that the pharmacist manager or the pharmacist manager's designated pharmacist would need to physically and on a weekly basis go and review the dispensing that occurs at those facilities. And again, that's not a departure from the current rule. The current rule says it has to be weekly. This would just clarify that it has to be in person, and also clarify that it doesn't have to be the pharmacist manager herself. It can also be a pharmacist designated by them for that.
Jay.
Yep.
Jay.
Yep.
I know the answer to this, but I think it's just popped in my mind. I hadn't thought about it at all, but you're talking about, you made the comment that registered nurses could only dispense under, at a health department. But we've got that one little hole that they can dispense a prepackaged container in an emergency room.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, which
But
that's
that's
got nothing to do
right.
with that.
Yeah, that's right. You're right about that, and that's of course would be covered by the hospital's pharmacy permit
Right.
on that.
Okay.
Right, you're right. The fourth category that we would propose to be able to avail themselves of a limited service permit would be free and charitable clinics. That's probably the second most frequently utilized practice site, or the practice site number 2 to automated dispensing devices in terms of the current limited service permit population. Again, I think the reasons that free and charitable clinics have been allowed over the years to have a limited service permit are fairly self-evident. The one change we are proposing, though, would be to make clear that the pharmacist manager of a free and charitable clinic limited service permit, or the pharmacist manager's designated pharmacist, has to be present the lesser of 20 hours per week or half the hours the pharmacy is open. Again, this just ensures that there is a physical presence by the pharmacist manager or the pharmacist manager's designee to ensure that appropriate dispensing regulations are being complied with and things are being done as they do. This brings a level of clarity and flexibility that should benefit those limited service permits. I do want to back up. I'm sorry, and Bill and Wallace, forgive me, I didn't mention this. There was also a recommendation from the committee with respect to nurse practitioner and PA dispensing sites. Right now, the rule says that a pharmacist has to pre-package each and every medication, pre-label each and every medication that's dispensed from that facility. The committee recommends that be changed to a more general reminder that the pharmacist manager is responsible for making sure that drugs are appropriately packaged and labeled, but would not specifically require that to be pre-packaging and pre-labeling. And in fact, that would make the PA and NP dispensing oversight requirements match up with the existing RN dispensing requirements, which do not have, which have a very similar requirement that that there be training and oversight of appropriate packaging and labeling, but not necessarily pre-packaging and pre-labeling every time. All right, so skipping back, the free and charitable clinics I already covered. The fifth category that we would propose as eligible would be county health departments for essentially exactly the same reasons as for free and charitable clinics. That some county health departments provide pharmacy services that go beyond the limited formulary that RNs can dispense. They provide essentially, a more robust dispensing of drugs. We would propose that a county health department that does go beyond RN limited formulary dispensing can get a limited service permit, and with the same pharmacist manager responsibility or designee responsibilities as we recommend for a free and charitable clinic. And then finally, we would recommend that critical access hospitals, which I think certainly Wallace is very familiar with, and there are 20 of those around the state. They're defined under the Federal Social Security Act as rural hospitals. I mean, in short terms, rural hospitals that provide 24-hour emergency care services and have no more than 25 beds, that they would be allowed to have a limited service permit for many of the same reasons that county health departments and free and charitable clinics would, and similarly would specify that the pharmacist manager or the pharmacist manager's designee would need to be present in that pharmacy 20 hours per week or half the hours the pharmacy is open. So that's an awful lot, but to try to recondense it, our proposal is to eliminate the impenetrable or ineffable, as I've described it, definition of limited service permit that exists, and instead write a rule that would say here are 6 categories of pharmacy practices that can obtain an LSP if they wish, and specifying more clearly what the pharmacist manager responsibilities would be. If that were done, Chase has run down that of the 428 existing limited service permits, only 36 of them would have to convert to a full service permit because their practices don't fit within any of these proposed categories. And that's on a spreadsheet. So, probably I guess it's somewhere around 8% of the existing limited service permits would have to convert to a full service. The flip side is there would be 16 critical access hospitals and 12 health departments that could, if they wished, convert from an existing full service permit back to a limited service permit. So the bottom line is this would have a relatively negligible effect on the existing permit census. So there's not going to be a lot of displacement. But what it certainly would provide is a much greater level of clarity for staff, for members, and for applicants as to both whether they are eligible to be a limited service permit and what responsibilities the pharmacist manager has. Bill and Wallace, did I get it basically right?
Yeah, I think you're right on.
So
we did spend a lot of time in discussing all of this. I think Bill will concur that, we went back and forth. We went through several drafts, several versions, and tweaked things and tried to bring consistency and some clarity. Clarity and consistency, I guess, was the biggest thing we tried to bring to the whole process, because it's always been a very nebulous classification, or whatever you want to call it, nebulous permit.
Yeah, we had a fair amount of discussion on whether it was appropriate for an LSP to do compounding, either sterile or non-sterile or both. And where we landed, I think, is a good place, in that an LSP could do compounding if needed, but would be subject to inspection on the same inspection schedule as any other compounding pharmacy.
Makes sense.
So Bill and Wallace, thank y'all for all your work on this, because I know this couldn't have been easy, and all the other people. I know Chase did a lot of work on this as well.
And
The
Jay.
30s and Jay, yes.
I was
Sorry.
just shepherding it along. These are the folks that did the hard work.
So of the 36 pharmacies that are not going to be eligible for this, like, are those types of pharmacies, should they really have had a full service permit? Is that what you guys found out of those? Is that pretty much?
I'll let Chase jump in here too if she wants to, but it appears that a lot of the Chase, I'm trying to get it right. I know several of them are pharmacies on college campuses that are really providing normal retail type pharmacy stuff. And I think, Ashley, they probably just got a limited service permit 50 years ago.
Okay. And that was my question. I didn't really phrase my question. I guess maybe an overview, just a very brief overview of what some of these pharmacies were. That
I'm gonna yield to Chase. I'll yield to Chase on that, because she's forgotten more about that than I'll ever know.
Okay. Thanks, Jay. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
So most of these that are on this list are ones that in finding the definition of what limited service was, we sort of reached into some different areas. And so these no longer fall under what we're looking at. A few of them are pharmacies that are in the same building as a full service pharmacy, but they run a separate operation. There's about 8 of those. Some of them are completely independent pharmacies, but they run on shorter hours. So they were granted a little limited service permit because of the shorter hours. A couple of them, like Jay was saying, are on college campuses, and They were originally granted limited service permits because they don't operate all year. And then there's a few other ones that are just really unique business models. So some places that are only open for appointments or clinics, or they have a very limited formulary or things like that. So it's the majority of the operations are independent operations dispensing medication. It's just they were originally sort of deemed limited service because of our nebulous definition and understanding of how do we say, yes, this is limited and this isn't limited. So does that all jive, Jay? If there's anything you'd like to add, please do.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, Ashley, is that for these that don't fit into these categories where we sort of look at them and say there are more systemic reasons that we're comfortable either or some combination of we're comfortable specifically about somebody being pharmacist manager on more than one permit, and some of them are sort of critical. I just use the critical access hospital as an example. They're critical service kind of things that if a pharmacist manager couldn't or restricted to only being pharmacist manager there, they might have trouble getting a pharmacist manager at all. That was sort of driving these categories. For some of these others, Chase is right, is over the years you get these oddball, and I say oddball not in a pejorative sense, but oddball things that came in, and we just had trouble saying, well, should you or should you not get one? Because you look at the definition and go, what am I supposed to do with that?
And most places have full-time pharmacists that work there, or pharmacists that work there, and other staff where they could fully function as a full-service pharmacy, maybe just with reduced hours.
Can I bring some reality to this?
Just real quick, Bill. Just a real quick response to Ashley. The answer to that is yes. And the other thing to remember, and what we would first of all, we got to go through a whole rulemaking if we want to do it. So there'll be comments and all that sort of thing. But in terms of how the conversion would work, if the rule passed, or we did a rule and it passed, we would just go to those and say, hey, you're not eligible to be a limited service permit anymore. So-and-so is the pharmacist manager. On your okay, we're just going to switch this to a full service. It wouldn't cost them anything. They wouldn't have to reapply for anything. We would just turn the switch on it. That's all. I'm sorry, Bill.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to talk over you, Jay.
No.
Look at number 15, compounding pharmacy infusion. That LSP started out as under the name Measured Dose Pharmacy. And the original intent was for one pharmacist to be able to work in a medicine shop pharmacy 40 hours a week, or be a pharmacist manager in a full-time permit, which was a medicine shop, and to be able to run a after hours, basically very low volume nursing home. Actually, it was an assisted living facility. The reason the LSP was needed because you can buy drugs under an LSP that you can't get from Cardinal or one of the other big three wholesalers, and definitely not from Mutual. You can buy institutional-like drugs that you can't get readily under a full-service permit, a retail pharmacy class of trade. It has more to do with class of trade. That permit, we changed the name to compounding pharmacy infusion to do the occasional, antibiotic for hospice or nursing home or pain pumps. And again, it gave us the opportunity to buy drugs through Cardinal under that class of trade that we just wouldn't have had access to. And there was some preferential pricing at one time, but that's gone away. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. That's a real live example of why and the use of that LSP, and I think it was a very legitimate use of it. Jay, you on the air?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Bill let me know that my other headset was garbling a little bit, so I switched headsets.
Your garbling improved greatly when you got a little bit closer to your screen. I don't know where your microphone is.
Yeah, that might have been a Bluetooth issue, but I just switched to my.
Maybe when you lean back, it gets worse.
So Ashley isn't the only air traffic controller anymore. I've got one too.
Did you hear what I just explained about that particular LSP? Okay.
I think Clint's got his hand up, I think.
I do, thank you. I've got a question about whether the committee in all of these instances meant that a pharmacist manager or a person designated by the pharmacist manager meant a specific person. I mean, I can see if you're talking about an automated dispensing device, you don't need to name Bob as the person who's going to check it. But obviously with a free clinic, you have to name somebody because there's going to be a pharmacist there all the hours that it's operating. So is there intended to be a distinction in what that means in different circumstances or not?
No, my recollection, and Wallace and Bill, if I'm wrong on this, was that we wanted to, and this came up most specifically in the context of critical access hospital, is you would want to designate somebody specifically who can be an alternate to the pharmacist manager who's going to be at that facility at least a certain number of hours. And Wallace can talk more about this, but the notion is that for various institutional reasons, sometimes it's hard, both in terms of hours or title or the rest of it, it's hard to name somebody else as a pharmacist manager. So yeah, as I understood it, it was, I'm the pharmacist, that there are a certain number of hours that the pharmacist manager or a specific pharmacist designated by the PM has to be in physically at the site. And so they can split that up.
If it's a place where a pharmacist works, it has to be Bob. If it's a place where a pharmacist does not work, it can just be whoever who is a pharmacist who goes to do it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I think we allowed for a pharmacist or designee.
Right. That's what we're talking about, the same thing, Bill.
Okay.
The pharmacist manager or the pharmacist manager's designee.
Right, Bill. My question was, does designee mean a particular person or who is the same from day to day, or does it mean just a pharmacist has to do it? And I think what Jay has said, which is the way I understood it, is if it's a free and charitable clinic, if it's a hospital, then that needs to be a specific person who is going to be there to supervise it. If it's a box somewhere, then it does not need to be the same person from week to week who goes to check it.
Right. Right.
Well, I thought we allowed for a pharmacist designee to do the checking, with the PM being having overall responsibility.
Right. We're not saying anything different, Bill. We're saying the same thing. So let me just put it in hard and specific example terms.
Clint's making it sound like we're making
what I'm saying is, if you've got a free and charitable clinic, you can't just say any pharmacist who happens to be there is the designee, because then you're not requiring any specific pharmacist to be there any period of time. The only way that 20 hours or half the time it is open works is if you are designating a particular person who has to be there. Because obviously there's always a pharmacist there. That's what I'm saying.
So, for example, Bill, let's say that I am the pharmacist manager at the Orange County Health Department. I have no idea. I don't know what the scope of their pharmacy services are. But let's say I'm the pharmacist manager of the Orange County Health Department Pharmacy, and they have a pharmacist manager, obviously. And the rule as it passed, if it passed, would say that the pharmacist manager or the pharmacist manager's designee has to be physically present at that pharmacy 20 hours per week or half the hours it's open, whichever is less, right? That's the baseline. So let's suppose that the Orange County Health Department pharmacy is open 40 hours per week. That means between me as the pharmacist manager and a pharmacist that I would designate, a specific designee, between the two of us, we would need to be there 20 hours per week between the two of us.
Well, I don't think that's what we talked about, because in the case of county health department, we decided that basically it's open 40, has the potential to be staffed 40 hours a week by a properly trained registered nurse, but the pharmacist manager only has to show up one time a week.
No, that's different. Right. There's two different things.
Two different things. All right.
We've got 3 categories of limited service permit that only require either a weekly or a quarterly visit, right?
Right.
That's an automated dispensing device, an auxiliary medication inventory, or a facility where a PA, NP, or RN dispense. For each of those, the pharmacist manager, there's a pharmacist manager, and that pharmacist manager could designate anybody they want, has to go over there once a week for the PA, NP, or RN dispensing, or once a quarter for the automated dispensing device or auxiliary medication inventories. That could be anybody. So that's for those 3. For the other 3, which are more like a real pharmacy, for lack of a better word. So that's free and charitable clinic,
right?
County health department that's doing more than RN dispensing,
okay,
and a critical access hospital. For those 3, the pharmacist, the baseline requirement is the pharmacist manager or the pharmacist manager's designated pharmacist has to be present at those, physically present, the lesser of 20 hours per week or half the hours the pharmacy is open.
Okay.
So the point is there, but that wouldn't just mean that any old person who happened to be there could be the designee of the moment, that the pharmacist manager would designate a pharmacist. And between the pharmacist manager and their designee, between those 2, they'd have to fulfill that physical presence requirement.
Okay. Well, where I got tripped up was the Orange County Health Department that does more than properly trained RN dispensing.
Right.
That's where I got confused.
Yeah.
All right. Wallace, that sounds like exactly what we talked about, right?
Yeah, but Wallace, you're muted.
Okay. Now, what I was getting ready to say is, like, for the case of the indigent care clinic or the free pharmacy clinic kind of things, and those situations where you've got a pharmacist manager, which is a guy that's likely got a job that's somewhere else, that he's working 40 hours a week, and he's really probably dependent on mostly volunteer pharmacists. He's going to have to find a volunteer that's going to commit to be the other pharmacist, the second pharmacist. Do you know what I mean?
Between the pharmacist manager and a volunteer, between the 2 of them, they would need to cover the physical presence at that pharmacy. So if it was a free and charitable clinic, for example, that was open 3 nights a week for 4 hours, so 12 hours a week, between the pharmacist manager and the pharmacist manager specifically designated volunteer, between the 2 of them, they would need to be there 6 hours per week in that hypothetical. And that's sort of the way that spins out. You can move the numbers, but that spins out the operation.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to process, because I don't know enough about where these indigent care clinics are, that, you know, what kind of volunteer pool they have and whatever. Is that going to put a burden on those kind of locations to be, when they're just, maybe somebody comes in, you know, I'll give you 3 hours a week, you know, but the guy that's holding it together is the person that's holding the limited service permit. Are you going to create a burden for that location to find somebody else that's willing to give that 20-hour, half of the 20 hours or half of the hours open. I throw that as a question because I'm sort of struggling with it a little bit in my mind right now.
But that LSP already has a glue guy. They already have a PM, right? So they have to have a PM to have a permit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's up to the PM to staff it with volunteers, or they don't, if he can't be there, then they just can't dispense that thing. So the guy holding the place together with the glue, I mean, he's in control. And if he can't be there and he can't find somebody to staff it, then it doesn't operate.
So can we maybe rein it in just for a little bit and like say that we're good? I mean, Jay, do we need to get a consensus of that we're good with those groups of categories right now? I noticed there's a lot more work to be done on this.
Yeah, what I would say is if the board, so remember this is a conceptual memo, right? And so what I would say is if the board is comfortable with the concept of what's been presented through the memo, that the next step is you would tell, all right, Jay and Clint, go out and turn this memo into a concrete rule proposal, which we would then bring back to the board. And then we could discuss the specifics of the specific rule proposal, make changes if we needed to make them. And then of course it would go through notice and comment. And so we'd get feedback from the outside on those, as we do for every rule that we propose.
So is everybody good with that? Thumbs up from Andy, thumbs up from Keith, Wallace, Bill.
Yeah.
I'm a thumbs up too. I feel like Michelle. Is Michelle still with us?
Let's see, let me check.
I saw her go away, but I don't know if she's back yet.
I don't see her.
My participant. Oh, there we go. She's on, or I'm showing she's on.
Yeah. Michelle, are you good with all that? We may have lost her.
Well, how about this? We've got 5.
Okay, there we go. It wouldn't let me hit. It would not let me hit unmute. Yes, I'm good with that.
All right, Jay. I said we move forward. Thank you, Michelle.
We'll do. Just timing wise, the drafting of this rule is that it's going to be a much heavier lift than the other. So we might not have that ready for March, but we'll be looking to probably April at the latest to have that ready for you.
And Bill and Wallace, that committee work will still be ongoing with that, correct, Jay? So they will remain on that committee as that.
Yeah. I think what we do is Clint and I come up with a draft of a specific rule, then we can wash it through the committee one more time and then bring it before the full board.
Sounds good. All right, let's move on to pharmacy interns.
All righty. So everybody certainly knows what the impetus behind this issue is. We've had a couple of instances in the past couple of years of guys acting as pharmacy interns who were not and never had been pharmacy students. And unlike most states, we've discussed this before, unlike most states, North Carolina, we don't have a statutory authority to create a paid registration system for pharmacy interns. Interns are defined by, it's sort of defined by negative implications. Someone who has, God, I'm sorry, I'm starting to blather even more than usual. The technician registration statute specifically does not apply to pharmacy students who are enrolled in a school of pharmacy. And then the Pharmacy Practice Act also says that is unlawful for someone to dispense or compound a drug unless that person is, among other things, a student who is enrolled in a school of pharmacy approved by the board and is working under the supervision of a pharmacist. So the problem, obviously, we've come up with is these imposters, and there's not any means by which someone who is thinking about employing someone in the position of a pharmacy intern, there's nothing they can come to us to get any sort of reassurance that the person is a student enrolled in a school of pharmacy, and therefore entitled to do all things which constitute the practice of pharmacy under the supervision of a pharmacist. So what can we do about that? What Clint and I are very comfortable that we do have independent authority to do is to set up a program whereby interns would have to register with us. And by registration, it would just mean that we would set up a system through ThoughtSpan where somebody would have to provide proof that they are currently enrolled in a school of pharmacy and therefore eligible to be an intern. And we would keep that registration, and we would not be able to charge a fee for that. I'll come back to that in a minute. And we wouldn't have any authority to stop someone from being registered as an intern as long as they were enrolled in a school of pharmacy. But we could set that up. Missy has estimated that if we had a simple registration system like that, we'd have between 800 and 1,000 interns, 800 and 1,000 interns in the system at any given time. She estimates it would require about 1/4 of a FTE to manage that, both of which we could absorb with current board resources. So could we set up a simple registration so that a pharmacy could say, this person wants to be an intern. Let me go onto the Board of Pharmacy website and verify that they are an intern. Yes, we can do that. We have the resources to manage it. Now, if the board wanted something more robust, for example, to say that we would have the ability to, for example, ask about criminal background or other qualifying factors, and someone would have to meet those and could be refused a registration if they don't, or have a registration revoked for misbehavior like that, we would need statutory authority to do. And a lot of, frankly, the majority of states, that's what they do. You've got the materials attached. In most states, they have statutory authority. They register techs, and techs can have their register interns, and interns can have their registration revoked. We see that from time to time. We've had some cases relatively recently from an intern in South Carolina who had his intern registration revoked. So that's what we can do now. What we could consider doing later on if we wanted to go to the legislature. And so I want to talk about what do we want to do? How do we want to set up here?
So these folks don't register as technicians.
No, the technician statute specifically says if you are currently enrolled in a school of pharmacy, you do not have to register as a technician. Some do because their employer makes them do it, and but they're not required to legally.
I think setting up the simple registration system is perfect for right now, because number one, I don't think that these kids pay enough to go to school as it is. Number two, the board can absorb it and not miss it, I would think.
I didn't say we wouldn't miss it, Keith. I just said we could afford it.
I agree with Keith. I think that's the first step that we should do. That may mean that we have to do something down the road, but we don't know that until we cross the first bridge. So personally, I agree with Keith that we just need to do the registration part. I think, Jay, you and I maybe talked about, I know this is more committee work, but forming a possible committee to talk about that and
yes,
get what requirements that we are asking on that and reviewing all that so that we could go forward with that. but I like Keith's idea a
I
lot.
think it would be useful to have a small committee designated as you see fit with that, and would certainly need to include me and Missy for figuring out the logistics of this, because programming is going to be involved in that. So Antoine would obviously need to be involved as our programming liaison, but yeah, I think that'd be the way to do it.
How's everybody feel about that?
I think it's great. I would not questioning Missy's statistics. I'm thinking that the number of registrants might be more than 1,000.
It might be.
You've got 400. You've got 4 schools with 4 years worth of kids in each one. Now, class sizes have been going down a little bit, but I've been playing with my calculator. I think it's probably more like 1,200, 1,300.
And we know we'd have some out of state. We know we have some students who are attending pharmacy schools in other states.
Yeah.
Who would also need to register with us.
Well, yeah, so South University.
Yeah.
So it sounds like everybody's good with that. Bill, I'm not sure if you're frozen. Your eyes haven't blinked the last few minutes.
He just blinked.
Oh, he did?
We have proof of life.
Oh.
That was the lizard.
Clint had his hand up. Clint, was there something we left out on?
Well, no, I decided it was not that important if we're going to have a committee. I do think there is one substantive area where we could potentially limit applicants without falling afoul of the absence of any statutory authority, and that is the question of what it means to be enrolled in a school of pharmacy. Just because you happen to have gone once and you're taking a break, does that mean you're still enrolled? And maybe Andy could tell us that there's some sort of overarching accreditation rule about who's enrolled or not, or if it's up to a school. But that's one question that committee would have to answer.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
actively enrolled.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean that you've taken a break for 3 years.
Yeah.
Right, but then you've got summer break questions, and what if you're
to pull a false example from thin air, Ashley? Is that where that one came from?
Yeah.
Well, we can look at the South Carolina rule, and that might provide some suggested language.
Okay. Missy, anything you want to add or feel like we need to? Obviously, we're going to have a committee to discuss it, but anything you want to inject here while we're talking about it?
I don't think so. I think it's a great idea. I mean, I do think it's going to be a little extra for everybody, but I mean, people want us to register them as interns. People are constantly calling and be like, "Oh, do you register?" And we're like, no, you don't have to. So I don't think it would be, impactful in a bad way, because they're already expecting it, because most states do. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Well, in academia these days, we talk about integrated curriculums and early immersion. We can get them early immersed into the Board of Pharmacy.
Love it. It
fits right in.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
The other thing that setting up a system like this could do for us is it might allow us to do away with that whole practical experience affidavit thing, that by setting up an internship registration, instead of having to do that paperwork and sign, that we could set up some means by which registered interns would report directly into ThoughtSpan their intern hours, and Missy or her designee would be able to run reports on those on a request, because that whole intern hour affidavit process is charitably described as quaint. So.
Yeah, and I mean, interns are one of the only categories that is still paper-based for us in the office. So having them get onto our ThoughtSpan platform and be able to run queries, like Jay said, I mean, it only makes sense.
Thunder and lightning and everything.
I don't know what the thunder and lightning is. I hope everybody's safe out there. Well, that's what I'm hearing is the consensus, Ashley, is that we'll add this to the list of committees to appoint at the end, with a task of creating a registration a non-fee based registration system. And Ashley, I fully agree with you that that is enough for now. If we get a year or two down the road and we figure out, my goodness, we've suddenly kicked over an anthill and we realize we've got a significant number of interns that we might need to take action about, then we can consider going to the legislature, and would be at that point able to articulate to the legislature, we are asking for this in a fee because we have specific examples of a problem to correct. It's not just something we're imagining and trying to get it. So I absolutely agree. All right. Cool deal. We are rolling on here. Tech vaccination. So everybody is familiar that we have the PrEP Act authorization for qualified technicians to administer vaccines. We know that that PrEP Act declaration is going to be in effect for potentially until 2024, although it could be concluded earlier. I'm getting feedback again. Test. I'm still getting it. I'll try to talk softer. So we've got some time on this one. I guess what we're looking to maybe see about is, what is the board's general notion or general feeling or about once the COVID crisis is over and we have this body of technicians in North Carolina that will have obtained the training and probably have some significant experience administering vaccines. Do we want to make that permanent once the COVID crisis has passed? Now, this is something that we absolutely don't have any authority to do unilaterally. This would require a statutory change. But I still think it's important for us to have a position on this and some thoughts about this so that we would be in a position to be proactive if a legislative effort was underway. So I guess what I hope to get today is a sense from you all about whether you think this is something we ought to be looking to make permanent once the COVID crisis has passed.
Yes.
I think it would be shameful if we let it go to this level and then let it fall by the wayside. To me, that's just not fair. And Andy, you've put together a tech program and we need to put that to good use.
Yeah, we speaking from experience already, we did our first training program with technicians this past Saturday here at Campbell. We've got more scheduled. And I agree. The term that I hear in the regulatory world is COVID stickiness, what's going to stick around after COVID. And I just don't think there's any way that we can go through this process, train these folks, and then say, well, that was only for this period of time. But as we know, we'll probably get some pushback, obviously, from certain individuals. I won't name those, but I think we all know who those are. I think the critical thing that we need to do with our technicians is make sure that they understand that this is a great opportunity, not only for them, but for the profession that they're a part of. And we want to make sure that we do a quality job with it. And so that's one of the things that I've reiterated to them as we've started up training, is that this is your opportunity. Take it seriously, do it well, don't be rushed. Because we don't need to add fuel to any fire that folks might have about the lack of appropriate things in place, whatever terminology they want to use about clinical or non-clinical, privacy, not enough privacy, and all those things. So I think we need to look at that going forward, and hopefully we'll have some positive experiences that we can talk about in a few months that will allow us to have a well-articulated argument for the legislative change that'll be necessary.
And I think that these vaccines are really going to hit retail pharmacies in the next few weeks and months. And I think that's going to be technicians' time to shine and we'll have a lot of data from that after, over the next couple months.
And, pharmacists need to make sure, look, they've got to supervise this thing to the extent that we would expect. We know that they don't stand over the shoulder of a student intern, and we don't expect them to do that with a tech either, but things need to be handled in a professional manner. This is an opportunity to shine, but it's also an opportunity to have a lot of hiccups, and we need to be careful.
And I'll qualify my emphatic yes with I have no plan. I mean, I have no immediate plan to send any text because I don't, we don't need it right now. But I think going forward, that is something that I would like for some of mine to shoot for. Like I mentioned earlier, we need them as probably more as administrators, because that's the hard part of this whole process right now.
Pharmacists can't do it all.
We sure do try, though.
Yeah.
To our fault.
Yep.
But you're right, Bill. I think in some scenarios, this would free up a pharmacist's time to counsel patients and to do the other things that maybe we're missing sometimes.
Physicians delegate to medical office assistants the ability to administer drugs, and I'd say pharmacy techs are better trained than most MOAs. But
I don't think there's any question about that for a pharmacy technician who's gone through the kind of training that the PrEP Act declaration requires. I mean, essentially, a technician that completes the required training under the PrEP Act has received the same training as a pharmacist for administration of vaccines. Now, clearly, the difference is that a pharmacist is trained to clinically assess a patient for whether it's appropriate to give them the vaccine at all, and DUR and all of those sorts of things. But in terms of the physical act of administering a vaccine, technicians are presently held to the exact same training standard as a pharmacist. So,
yeah, if you use the APHA model, which is the most popular certificate program, having just taught it this past Saturday, it is essentially what we use for pharmacists minus the clinical aspect. I mean,
right.
It's the expectation that they practice giving an IM injection and a subcutaneous injection, just like we would do with a pharmacist. And I'll add to that, the techs, at least in our first group, very comfortable with the syringes, because guess what? They're already pulling up vaccine for folks at the pharmacy. They're just not allowed to stick. So they're already comfortable with aseptic technique and being, careful with those types of things. So that's great.
Yep. So Jay,
Andy, where did you get the IM practice injections administered to you?
Well, we still have an audience, though. But
I wondered why you were shifting uncomfortably in your seat over there.
So Jay, it sounds like we're all in favor of moving forward with that. Obviously, more information to come over the next several months, but it sounds like that we, as a whole board, support that moving forward.
And that's perfect, because what I suspect is going to start happening, Ashley, over the short term here is there are going to start to be some inquiries from the legislature or other pharmacy organizations to say if there is a move to make the technician vaccination authority permanent, how does the board feel about that? And now I'll be able to confidently say the board discussed that as retreated and is comfortable and supportive of that process going forward. So, and that'll give us an opportunity to shape it.
Do you know if NCAP is going to have that same position?
I don't know. I don't know for certain, but I strongly suspect that they are going to take the same position on permanent technician vaccination.
They were partnered with us on these first couple ones we're doing in an effort to get technicians to join NCAP. And so I think they're going to be supportive. Jay, don't forget when you talk to the appropriate people out there that the PrEP Act limits the technicians to immunizations between age 3 and 18, except for COVID. So we've got to make sure that the legislators know we can't have that. It can't be limited to 3 to 18.
Yeah, you are right. I thank you for the reminder on that. You're right. I will. This is a bit of a side move, but Andy, do know that there have been some discussions at the national level with DHHS that that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I understand why they've done it that way. It's because of the factual finding you have to make for PrEP Act authorization, but you're right. And would it be ironic indeed if technicians were deemed safe to give pediatric vaccines, but they couldn't give them to an adult. It doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense.
It's completely nonsensical. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that reminder.
All right, so it sounds like we're all in favor of that. So I know it's 4:30 and
we can burn. We've got, well, 3 things
it looks
left.
like, yeah.
And it's not gonna, I don't think that's gonna take tons of time. Taking my cue from the president, very quickly moving to the telepharmacy committee. So let me just briefly say where the committee is remember, there are 3 things the telepharmacy committee has been charged with looking at. Number 1 is the extension of remote medication order entry practice to all forms of pharmacy practice. And there's been a lot of work done on that, meetings, et cetera. And I actually think we're getting pretty close to a recommendation on that. The second thing that telepharmacy committee is charged with looking at is what we are calling teledispensing. That's the notion of technicians at a dispensing site being supervised by pharmacists using real-time audio video. Interestingly, there's some DEA issues about to come down on that will bear consideration. And the third thing that telepharmacy is charged with is direct to patient automated dispensing devices. I think we're getting close, or the committee is getting close to a recommendation on RMOE. Andy, to use the term you used a while ago, COVID stickiness, I like that quite a bit. I think that RMOE is very much a COVID stickiness issue that we need to probably decide what we're going to do with, because there's a lot of RMOE being used now under existing waivers. And I think that we need to have some decisions made about what we're going to be comfortable with after that. And so while the latter 2 issues I think are much less time sensitive, I think the RMOE one is not. And we probably need to think about maybe setting a deadline to get a recommendation on that.
I would agree with that, Jay, because I feel like there's a lot of that going on, and that's going to be a question after COVID, or when things settle down with COVID. Can that continue?
Right. So the committee, that's Keith, Andy, and Wallace, right? Did I get that right? Or is it Bill? I'm so confused with all the
Hang on, I have my notes here. I can tell you.